your life is less likely to get out of control if you ring fenced it ahead of time and say, this is what I'm willing to sacrifice and this is what I'm not willing to sacrifice.
Thank you so much today, Sean, for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. So I want to get into some of the stories that when we spoke the last time that you shared about the shield and the trench whistle, and there's so much amazing ways in which you are weaving in history with leadership and the way that we show up in our lives and in the world and our business. But before we get into that, I'd love for you to tell the Pivot Me audience how you got into this type of work. So my understanding is you're a traditional historian. How did you sort of make this leap into, this is really applicable to today's world?
So I guess it sort of met in the middle, really, two different directions were pulling me. One was a desire to figure out new ways to bring these archaeological artifacts to a wider audience. And another one was just simply noticing that a lot of my friends who are in business, many of them solopreneurs and entrepreneurs and so on, were asking for my advice. What's your take on this? What's your take on that? Just in a friendly sort of way. And what I realized over the years was that I was referencing all of the classical background and the sailing background and the historical background, and even using objects to sort of help with that. And it sort of just all came together one day. And I thought, hey, you know what? This is actually a pretty good way. I can basically use these objects and use these stories to help modern people because, as a species, we haven't evolved that much. A lot of things have happened to us, but the essence of leadership is the same. The core of, striking out on your own, opening a business is the same, or similar enough that it makes no odds. And so why not bring these lessons from the past to people today? Not because it's history and should be sanctified and worshipped and so on, but rather it's just a record of what other humans have done. So if you're going to start off on a business or you're encountering a business problem, why wouldn't you ask what other humans have done when they faced not necessarily specific business problems, but when they faced problems? Mm-hmm. How have they solved problems? And how can the objects that we've produced in the past speak to those problems? And what I found was that people, enjoyed that. And so it's different enough that it took them out of their sort of daily world, the thing that they deal with every day. And the sort of, I don't want to say shock value, but the novelty of it sort of helped them to remember the essential points. And I think that's basically where I went with that.
I'm curious if you think that, and maybe the answer is both, but is it that the piece that you're referencing from history was so relevant, or was there, I'm just thinking about the way that our brains work and business owners' brains. Is it that, hey, this piece of history is so relevant? Or is it also that, hey, your problem that you're struggling, that you think is so big and so insurmountable and so you and unique, is actually not? Like, this has been happening for thousands of years.
More the second. So I don't tend to lead with the history and say, here's a historical story, let's see how you fit into it. But sure. Rather, what are you facing? Right? What happened to you? And you think, well, here's what somebody else did. Right? So people look at, ancient Greek stories. You don't have to be a scholar of ancient Greece. You could just simply know the myths and the stories from films and childhoods, whatever it was. And you can look at a story and say, well, look, this is a story about something that happened a long time ago. It's a myth, whatever. Or you could say, actually, what goes beneath that is something we can use for setting goals. So when you set goals, ask yourself what the consequence is of being overambitious in your goal setting. And you think, well, okay, here's a story from antiquity about that. Agamemnon, right, sacrificing his daughter Iphigenia at Aulis. So he had this goal of taking Troy, right? The reasons don't matter. That was his goal. But he had failed to say beforehand how far he was willing to go to achieve that goal. And when he met an obstacle, he had offended one of the goddesses, and she refused to let the wind blow in the right direction, so he was trapped in the harbor. And it was revealed to him that the only way he could get out of the harbor was to sacrifice his daughter, the thing that meant the most to him. So he just immediately said, well, okay, game is up. I'm going home. Well, maybe we'll try it next year. And Odysseus came up to him and said, well, actually, wait a minute. If you have asked all these people to come here and join you on this crusade, you've asked them to risk their lives and their livelihoods and their health for you. You have to show them that you're willing to sacrifice everything yourself. You can't ask them to sacrifice without you sacrificing. So he did it, and he killed his daughter. He sacrificed his daughter. The winds blew. And the thing is, he achieved his goal. But he achieved it at the cost of sacrificing the thing that he loved the most. And so when he came back home, he was in turn murdered by his wife. So he didn't get to enjoy the fruits of his own victory. So you could say that's a melodramatic story from the Bronze Age, and it is, but it illustrates this point that I think a lot of small business owners fail to consider. You see them say things like, "Well, I'm going to sacrifice everything. I'm willing to give it my all," and these phrases that have meaning,
Mm-hmm.
but they fail to consider what they're really saying. And I think that it's useful to consider when you're making goals. Don't say, I'm going to sacrifice everything just as a show of enthusiasm. Actually ask yourself, what are you willing to sacrifice? Are
Mm-hmm.
you going to give up time with your kids? How much? Are you going to give up time with your spouse? How much and why? And in return for what? And realistically assess it. And then when you have designated how much time you're willing to dedicate to your business, now at least you know, because you've put a fence around it and said, okay, this is what I'm going to do with my time. And it doesn't, your life is less likely to get out of control if you
Mm-hmm.
ring fenced it ahead of time and say, this is what I'm willing to sacrifice and this is what I'm not willing to sacrifice. But when you take that point and you sort of reference it to one of these ancient stories, it now is sanctified by time, so to speak. It's like this happens throughout history. Right? You're not the first one to meet this problem. And look at it's sort of a warning story, isn't it? It's like, look what happened to this guy when he
Sure.
failed to consider ahead of time, what goal setting really means, and the potential downsides of it. Right? So that's the kind of
That's
thing. And
true.
so people think, that's memorable. I can, it's not every day that I have, in my business life, someone's talking about a Bronze Age human sacrifice. Oh, okay. And it sticks in their mind. And because
Yeah.
it sticks in the mind,
Mm-hmm.
a month from now, when they find themselves being pushed to sacrifice more than they want, they can remember the story.
Mm.
And I think that's the key thing. It's remembering the story, the lessons at the key moment months later when you need to remember it.
Yeah, it's so relevant. It's interesting because as a business advisor, a question I ask people a lot of times is like, what will this cost me? Like everything is
Mm-hmm.
an exchange, whether it's time, money,
Mm-hmm.
energy, resources, but what will this cost me? There's the upside
Mm-hmm.
to obtaining the goal. For sure, we need to take a look at that. And then there's the tactical steps of how you pursue it. But you need to be able to answer the question of what's this going to cost me? And
Yeah.
and make amends with it. I love that you're talking about drawing boundaries. What I wrote down is don't sacrifice your daughter because your wife will murder you. So I
Yes.
feel like
And
it's
also it cost himself his own humanity, right? Because
oof.
the siege lasted much longer. But here's the fascinatingly complex thing about that story is
Mhm.
that we can't forget that he did succeed in his goal. He took the city of Troy. He got what he wanted. It's just that he sacrificed too much to get it. So Odysseus was right. He had to do what he was asking his people to do. He couldn't ask his people to sacrifice everything without him being willing to sacrifice everything himself.
Yeah.
But the flip side, and this is where what we miss in the modern world, isn't it? It's the dark, sinister flip side to that. It's that what you have sacrificed is going to come back to bite you, even if it's years later. So
Yeah.
consider carefully what you want. And I often see people say things like, "Well, I'm ready to sacrifice everything. I'm all in." And what they're really doing is saying, "I want the success. I'd really like to be rich. I'd like to be well known. I want to be successful." And that extreme language is just a way of reflecting enthusiasm, but it has an effect on your psyche over time. If you
Mhm.
keep saying that without understanding what you mean, you're in danger of ending up like Agamemnon. You're caught in a trap of your own making, right? And now you really have to make a choice you really don't want to make, right?
Yeah.
So that's the time when you've got to remember the story and say, okay, back off,
Mhm.
and have the courage to back off. By the way,
Yeah, I love that you said it cost him his humanity as well, because what you have sacrificed in the pursuit of the goal, again, he got the goal, right? But what he
mm-hmm.
had to sacrifice in the pursuit of it made it so the goal had no sweetness to it, I would imagine. I'm not
Exactly. So
familiar
he
with the
was the
story,
most
but
famous man in the world for a brief moment in time, the richest,
mm,
the most powerful, for a matter of a week. And then he was, and and this resonates more with a Bronze Age Greek male audience than it does to us. But when he was killed by his wife while he was naked in the bath with his own sword.
mm,
And those things, this is like the worst humiliation you could suffer as a male Bronze Age warrior. So it wasn't that he just lost his life. It wasn't he just died and that was draw curtains. It was this most degrading of deaths, right? So as much as he gained, he then lost that correspondingly in the negative side of the ledger. And so it's a powerful story. And you think, okay, well, people knew this stuff 3,000 years ago, right?
mhm,
And it's so easily applicable to what we do today. So I think
mhm.
that's the point. That's the point behind bringing it alive to audiences today.
Sean, I have a question about how you pulled these stories together. Before I ask that, how often are you watching, whether it's people that you know, people that you work with, or let's just say people in media or on TV, and you're about to sacrifice your daughter, metaphorically speaking?
I wouldn't say every day, but I see it more often than you might think.
Yeah.
And it's usually in little things. It's like, yeah, but it's the yeah, but argument. So, yeah, I'm going to stay late. Well, you know, you're, I don't know, something's happening tomorrow. Your daughter's graduating. Yeah, yeah, but I'll just be a minute.
Mm-hmm.
And when you add up those, I'll just be a minute,
Mm-hmm.
right? What are you going to get at the end of your time? Because remember, Agamemnon's come up with was 10 years after he made the sacrifice, right? It took him, according to the legend, 10 years to take the city. It didn't actually take 10 years in reality. It's impossible for a Bronze Age army. But anyway, the point is it was the proverbial long time.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like an immediate cause effect.
Mm-hmm.
And so the idea, one of these great fallacies, whose name I forget at the top of my head, but it's this notion that you're cutting corners and you're getting away with cutting corners, right? And we see this, you know where we see this a lot? In sailing and in aviation accidents, where pilots will skip things on the checklist because that issue has never come up. And then after flying for a couple of years, they oh, we don't need to check this. Yeah, it'll be fine. And you know what they often forget to check? They forget to check that the control stick is free. So when they
Mm-hmm.
take off, they realize that the control stick is locked. And by that time, and they crash. And why? Because they've just been leaving it off the checklist. Why? Because it's never been locked before. Why do we have to check it now? You see? So it's like they cut corners, and those cutting corners will also catch up to you. You're essentially sacrificing your future health for a present gain or
Mm-hmm.
perceived present gain. So if you're just cutting a corner, you're saving it. So sacrifice comes in a lot of different ways, I guess is the point I'm making. And it will catch. So in that sense, to go back to your question, I see that stuff very often, as I'm sure you do as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
And
so yeah.
what I find is the system will say, whether it's the business, it's the relationship, it's a relationship with your kids, it will survive for a period of time off of the sort of residual effort, time, energy we've put into it. So it's not immediate. I love that you said it's 10 years or roughly 10 years, whatever that ends up being in the Bronze Age. But I think that's really important because the cause and effect may not be very clear in the moment. Now, hindsight's 2020. We can look back and go, here was this, and then this was the beginning of my downfall, my business breakup, whatever that is. But it's not immediate. So the first time you stay late, for example, and guys, I realize we're talking to a lot of business owners and a lot of people that sometimes have to stay late. We understand that. But part of the work that we do here in Pivot Me is helping to, shortcut where we can the path to success, and also acknowledge when sacrifice is not the cost of admission. Like, how can we do it where we're not sacrificing going home and seeing our family or our kids or skipping our workouts in the morning? So I don't want to demonize sometimes staying late. However, the first time it's fine because we've got residual energy still in that relationship, or the first couple times we skip the gym, it's okay because I'd been really good about going to the gym for 5 days a week for 6 months, and it's fine. But what happens is we blink, and then suddenly it's been 4 months since we've gone to the gym, or we blink and suddenly we've missed all of our kids' soccer, schedule.
Don't institutionalize the shortcutting. Don't institutionalize the little sacrifices. As soon as you ritualize your shortcuts, it becomes, like you just said now, it becomes a new thing, right? So now it's gone 6 months without going to the gym, and now you're starting to get out of breath, and you've lost all the, it's like, okay, so staying late is one question, but do it for a special purpose. Don't do it as a ritual, because now you're institutionalizing, you're resetting the boundary further out. And if you made a goal and you said, this is what I'm willing to sacrifice, this line I'm not willing to cross, and then you push it and you keep pushing it, by the time 5 years go by, it's nowhere near where you put it originally. And is that good leadership?
Yeah.
Of yourself, where you're willing, you said, here's where the line is, and then 5 years later, well, look, the line is nowhere in sight, it's way outside. Is that actually good leadership? I would argue it's questionable.
I want to talk on that, but I'm going to pause here real quick, Sean, because I realized I did not plug in my Ethernet cable. So we're going to pause. The recording's still going on, but we'll edit it. Hold on 1 second. I just want to make sure we have good internet connection. Hang tight. Hang tight. Funny, speaking of checklist, I did not do mine this morning.
There you go. There you go.
One of mine is checking the Ethernet connection. We were on Wi-Fi, and I never trust that. Okay, so we're heading back. I'm going to make a note for editing. So before there's a couple other stories that I really want you to share for the pivoters that are listening. But before we go on, I just have to ask, we were talking before about being trained in the sciences and sort of the way we approach information. And one of them is, we categorize information, we pull things together and into categories. How, I'm just thinking from a tactical perspective, I'm wondering how, Sean, you are a historian, you have all these stories and these relevant things. And did you sit down and go, I'm going to categorize this. This one's about leadership. This one's about goals. This one's about personal sacrifice. Like how did you go when someone sits down with me and they present with this problem? These are the stories that are relevant to that.
No, I tend to be more of the riff unplugged kind of thing. It's like you have a store, you have a store of things that you've gone to before. But mostly I find that when you talk to people, if you say, now this is not to say anything against people who do categorize, because it's very useful to do that. But for me personally, what I found is that you don't want to have this like Procrustean bed, right? So where you start to cut the person to fit the thing that you've prepared. So instead, take the person where they're at and then find stuff to help them where they're at, rather than say you fit into this category, so I'm going to use these stories, right?
Yeah.
So I find it's more relaxed and easy. And you don't have to, I think as the coach or whatever you want to call yourself, you don't have to have all the answers immediately. You just have to show a willingness to ask the questions. And then together we'll find an answer, or I'll nudge you in the correct way and so on with these stories. But the idea that you are sort of an immediate answer producing machine tends to be that Procrustean base, tend to start, stretching people or cutting them to fit your notion of what, or just to fit what you've got in your sort of storehouse of knowledge. But I think it should be operating the other way. So just listen. And I think that's another underrated skill as well. Just listen to what other people are saying. Don't use the other person speaking as you simply waiting for your turn, but actually listen. So one of the things I use for my leadership things is this Bronze Age, Iron Age sculpture of a horse. We could do 2 hours on this thing, but if you notice, look at how big the ears are, right? So a leader is listening, and this animal is peaked and primed. You can see how tense it is. It's peaked and primed, and it's taking in information from the outside world. And so I like to use this thing. I keep this thing on my desk anyway, just to remind myself. As I say, I've encoded this object with half a dozen or more lessons, but it's the idea that you've got to be actively, attentively listening and focused, rather than just simply waiting for your turn to speak. So I think that the approach is that I will listen to what people will say, and then I'll see if I can help them with anything from the past, rather than saying, well, take this medicine and eat it, that sort of approach. Yeah. But a lot of people do it the other way, so it's not a criticism.
They certainly do. So when that's sitting, you said it was a Bronze Age horse sitting on your desk.
It's an Iron Age horse.
Iron Age. Sorry. Okay.
Yep.
So Iron Age horse that's sitting on your desk. So are you working with someone and then you look at that and you go, oh, that triggers me to listen better or be attentive.
Bingo. Exactly. Okay. Exactly. And that's what if I can use the word teach, that's what I teach other people to do, is to have objects around them. Whether you're working as an entrepreneur, a solo entrepreneur, or in a corporation, just have the objects around you, addressing points that you know that you need to keep working on because they're weak points. And then when the crisis moment comes, your eye will fall on the object and say, okay, yes, I remember. And then you slow down a bit, and then you just consider it from all angles, or a different angle, or from this point of view of not rushing ahead. And it works like a charm. It's just a mnemonic device that triggers a memory of a story, and the story triggers something that you want to avoid or something that you'd like to have. And it's as simple as that.
I love this idea. Can you tell us about the artifact that's behind you right now?
Yeah, this is a copy of a shield from 5th century BC. I use this as a metaphor for what it's like to work in a team and what the place of the individual is in the team. So these shields all had individual emblems there. So each person, I suppose I should back up by saying that these shields were held by people who were standing in ranks, right? So many ancient Greek armies were not composed of people with uniform shields, right? As far as we can tell. So every person had their own emblem. So you stood out as an individual within the team. But what's unique about these things is the way that you hold them. So you hold them not like this, but you put your arms through. I know you can't see me at the moment, but and you hold it like this.
Okay.
Right? What that does, I'm going to try and not disconnect myself. Here's my archaic technology. You're holding it, and you can see half of my body is open. Right? You can just see this, and the other half of this shield is flying out in space. This part of my shield is covering the person to my right, and my open, vulnerable spot here is being covered by the person's overhanging part of their shield to the left. So to cut a very long story short, what I use this for is to say that when you're a part of an organization, yes, you should consider yourself to be an individual, right? But you also are, number one, offering help to your neighbor, and you're accepting help from another neighbor. And it's the interplay of offering and accepting help that real power comes from, right? And I think a lot of people in the modern world view power as me against the world, right? It's me on my own. I can do it. I can solve everything on my own, right? And what we see from the ancient experience is that, yes, you are there front and center with your emblem, right? You are protecting yourself. But your real power comes from the fact that you're accepting help from the person next to you, right? And also you're offering help at the same time. And there is no weakness in any of those three positions. There's great strength in accepting, providing your own, and offering to others. It's on a plane. And I think that if more people, especially people who are running small businesses, understood that, I think that their small business would be likely more successful, and people would be more, they would enjoy the experience of running their own business more when you realize that it is not a weakness to ask for help from someone else, right?
Yeah, for our audience, for sure, they have no problem putting the shield in front of the next person. That would never be a problem. Typically it's the accepting help from the person on the other side. And so that's why that story is so relevant for our audience. Is most of us are very willing to help out others, to protect others. We're ready to step into the leadership role and say, okay, I'm going to guide my people. But they sometimes forget that all of us have weak spots, whether that's because the shield isn't there or something more tangible. But
in this case, the weak spot is built into the structure because you need to have an arm free with a spear to strike out. So you can't have your own, you can't be blocked by your own thing. So you need to be able to reach around the shield. But your neighbor's shield then covers that weakness. So it's a structural weakness that's built into the nature of the phalanx because of the human body being what it is, right? But I think that your point is exactly right. I think that if you recognize that think about so a lot of these people are quite, I don't know what word you want to use, confident and self-assured and so on. But if you look at something like this, which is this kind of, ultimate masculine symbol of virile fighting strength, and you can't really get any more than that. And the source of the strength, part of the source of the strength of that organization is that you are accepting help. I think it's a really resonant thing. And also, don't forget, you've got somebody behind you. And when you yourself become tired in combat, they had a little maneuver where you sort of do a little dance and you exchange positions. So the person who is your number two is now the number one, and you're supporting them, right? And they just simply signal, say, I'm done. I've been 5 minutes. And you just you swap out, right? And so you're asking for help from the side, and you're asking for help from behind. And because that is constantly going on, that's where the strength of the organization came from, right? And whether you're a single person or in a small team, it always works because no one's really single. Even the most rugged individual is dependent on other people for help, right? And if you acknowledge that, you will release a lot of stress.
I'm just imagining, I love this visual. I love it. And thank you so much for picking up the shield and demonstrating it. I'm just imagining how many people are listening right now and thinking, well, no, I have the shield and I'm still trying to use the spear over top of the shield or around the shield. And no, I don't get tired. I don't do a little dance and switch out with somebody else. Like I will, it's the grind mindset. I'm going to stay in it. I'm in it to win it. And I'm just imagining so many business owners, and myself included, we've gone down this road of, no, I'll do all the parts. I'll do all the parts. And some of them are even thinking, hey, my team is there, but they're way back there. They're not right behind me. They're way back there. And I'm sort of the tip of the spear. And only if I can't handle it all, will I then tag them in. And I'm just hearing no, you're supposed to be tagging them in. You're supposed to all be lined up together, in fact.
We'll flip the script on that, April, for a second, and take a look at what happens if the person in the front is fighting and wants to be what they call in Greek the promachos, the front fighter, the person who stands out in front. So if that person is unwilling to ask for help, they're going to get tired and more tired and more tired. And you know what's going to happen? They're going to start making mistakes. And if they start making mistakes, if they get wounded in the leg, if they collapse from exhaustion, well, then the person behind is tripping over their body, and you've fundamentally weakened your structure. So your display of this kind of I can do everything, I am the world unto myself, I'm all conquering, that will get you and your team killed. Right? It guaranteed to do so. It will happen. That's why the Greeks organized it. Don't forget, the ancient Greeks were rugged individualists, absolutely rugged individuals. The whole point of that culture was about excellence, about excelling in mind and in body. It's about being the best. And they're the ones who came up with this. So if this culture that extolled individual virtue is willing to fight like this, the Roman army was the same, right? They had a republic and they used a slightly different type of shield. But they used to, according to some of the stories, if somebody had stepped out of the rank and had gone forward to heroically fight the enemy single-handed, if that person survived, they executed him after the battle, right?
Wow.
Because he broke the ranks. And by breaking the ranks, you are putting everybody at risk, including the success of the endeavor. And the safety of your city is dependent on the success of your endeavor in this field, right? So from this metaphor, okay, we're not talking about fighting, spear thrusts and so on, but still the idea is the same, right? And if the idea worked then, it also will work now. And it also applies now. The same things apply. Right?
Sean, what do you say to someone this is a great story and so relevant. What do you say to someone who's listening right now and they have been the one at the front with the spear and the shield and they're trying to do it all and they've got maybe a small team behind them, but they're not even sure if they were sitting in front of you right now, like how would you guide them? What would you say?
Well, let me ask this question to these people, right? Let's shift from ancient Greece to a modern airplane. You're a passenger on an airplane. You've got 3 pilots in the cockpit and the lead pilot is a macho guy. I can do everything. I'm the Chuck Yeager of 21st century. I'm a test pilot. I flew in the Navy. I never get tired. I don't need any backup. And lo and behold, it's a long transatlantic flight, bad weather. He's getting a little bit burned out. If you're a passenger in that plane, would you want that pilot to keep pushing it? Or would you like the co-pilot? Would you like to know that the co-pilot has taken over and given the guy a rest, right? Of course. Why would you think that? You'd think that because it's self-evidently the case that one person, however skilled and talented they are, cannot fly the plane indefinitely through bad weather and darkness and everything else, right? You're human. That means you have limitations. Now, you might be more skilled than the next person. You might fly, in this metaphor, 2 hours more than an average pilot, right? But still, it's a 10-hour crossing. The reason there's a co-pilot there is to spell you. And the third pilot is to spell him. And you would feel very comfortable on your transatlantic flight, knowing that these 3 people are working together as a team, watching. And very often in the modern cockpit, the job of the guy who's not in charge is to watch the guy who is in charge to make sure that guy's not failing. His job is to check that the other guy is not screwing up. And one of the definitions of screwing up is not recognizing your limits and saying, I'm done, I need a break.
One of the definitions of not screwing up is not saying I'm done, I need a break. That was good.
That's what they're there for. Same thing in a family passenger car. If you're driving and you're a teenager or whatever, and you see your parents and your dad is one of those gung ho, I can drive. I used to know somebody like this. He said, I can drive for 20 hours without stopping, and he drive from England to Poland, and he would try and break his own record every time he did it, right? And you think, well, that was always a nerve-wracking experience for the passengers, right? Because he wouldn't recognize his limits. And lo and behold, when we got halfway into the journey, he started making mistakes, not being as quick to react, swerving into another lane, drifting off a little bit, and think just for the sake of, So he was a very skilled driver. However, he had limits. So you see the point. So that's what I would say to those people.
That's really good. I think we have to acknowledge that black and white thinking can get us into trouble. And
it will. It's not can. I say guaranteed. It's not a question.
Sure. And so relevant to this situation, it's 2 things can be true. You can be an extremely skilled driver. You might be the most capable driver to make that trip to Poland, to make that transatlantic flight. That was really hard. You might be the most skilled person, and yet you still need to tap out.
And I would go further, April, to say that part of the definition of being skilled is saying, help me. Because would you like to be a passenger in that plane knowing your pilot is constitutionally unable to ask for help? Or would you like a pilot who is very skilled and very well trained, who is able to ask for help and it is able to take it when it's offered? surely you would feel more comfortable flying in the second plane. Surely. So the
That's so
same
relevant.
applies to your business. Same thing with these guys in their hoplites. You want the guy in the front to say, I'm done, I'm wounded, I need to take a break.
Mm-hmm.
Even if he's Achilles himself, who, by the way, was killed. Let's not forget, right? In
Don't forget
battle.
how that ends.
Yeah,
It's
exactly. So you see, it's the
so
same
relevant.
theme keeps coming up again and again and again. The only time we see the opposite theme happening is in Superman comics, like fantasy, where Superman's the one guy who saves the day. There's a reason it's fantasy though.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't happen. That's
Mm-hmm.
why it sells as fantasy. It's not a realistic reflection of the world, and which is why it works in a Marvel superheroes comic or whatever. So
Yeah.
don't be the fictional character. Be the real person.
It's interesting because at first I was applying it to business, but then I took it a step further. So the pivoters know this, but for years I've led Habitat for Humanity builds overseas. And I would take a team of people, typically that are not used to those conditions, and go build a house in a different country. What would happen a lot of times is we'd go in the winter, and I'd have a lot of Americans and Canadians that are used to colder weather. And then I would take them to, El Salvador, and it was warmer, and they would construct a house or build, water filtration system. And I'd always, as the leader, I'd always have to recognize the liabilities. And the
Mm,
liabilities weren't like the weakest member on the team. It was the person, usually a male, that would not tap out because I
mm-hmm,
knew that they were a risk. I knew that they wouldn't stop to drink water. They wouldn't stop to eat. They would push
mm-hmm,
it to the point that they would injure their back or they would pass out from dehydration. And this is like a little behind the scenes when you're the leader of an organization like that. You have to be very aware of, okay, that person will not ask for help. That person will try to lift the 200-pound bag of
mm-hmm,
cement by themselves. They're not going to, when when the mason calls water breaks, they're not going to stop. Oh, I'm fine. I can push through. And I did this. I used to be in the army.
mm-hmm,
They'll have some story as to why,
mm-hmm,
limitations don't apply for them. And so
mm-hmm,
your story is relevant in so many different situations because I'm just thinking about how many builds I had to identify those guys. I'm thinking about a
mm-hmm.
couple of names right now. And I was like, I always knew that they, though well-intentioned, were the problems because they
Yep,
did not acknowledge their own limitations.
yep.
And whether that's ego, it doesn't matter really what's driving it. At the end of the day, if we have to take someone to the hospital, the build doesn't get done.
Mm-hmm. Right. Right. And also somebody else might be injured. A third person might be injured as a result. You
Yeah.
know, so you are weakening it. So you have a certain reserve of strength. And again, yours might be different from someone else's. Yours might be different from what yours was a week ago. It always changes, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the point is, you will reach a time where logic and I want to say empathy for other people, it all comes to a head and say, okay, at this point, I need help,
Mm-hmm.
right? I need to take a holiday, vacation. I need someone to solve a problem. I need to talk it over. So whatever it is that you need.
Mm-hmm.
To the people watching, you will be viewed as the hero because you were heroic enough to recognize your limitations and ask, right?
Yeah.
Here, okay, one story. Another. This is showing how I think of stories. Here's one that just came to my mind. Going back to ancient Greece, Odysseus again. You might remember the story of him getting into the cave with the Cyclops, and he blinds the Cyclops, and they hold on to the bottom of the sheep and they escape in the cave. The thing to remember about that story is that as Odysseus was sailing away, he decided to mock the Polyphemus, his name. He decided to mock him because he hadn't told the monster his name when they were in the cave. He said, "My name is nobody," right?
Mm-hmm.
When they were sailing away, he said, "I want you to know you were defeated by Odysseus, king of Ithaca." Now, the problem is that the Cyclops was the son of Poseidon, the sea god, and
Mm-hmm.
Odysseus was sailing on the sea. You see where this is going.
Mm-hmm.
Poseidon decided to take revenge on behalf of his wounded son, and that caused him to lose all of his crew members, all of his ships, and to take 10 years to come back. Had he kept his mouth shut, meaning had he kept his ego under control,
Mm-hmm.
he would have avoided, all those men would have come home safely, and he would have arrived home 10 years before he did. So the inability to resist the ego call, I can do it now because I can,
Mm-hmm.
that's going to get you. And it
Mm.
got Odysseus. He lost all of his crew, all of his team, his ship, all of the money he saved, all the money he took taking the whole point of his trip gone. Everything lost, zero. He was
Mm-hmm.
naked on a beach finally, ultimately, because he couldn't keep his mouth shut. He let his ego get away with it. Like, I can do it. I'm better than everybody else. I'm better than this guy I just defeated. Right? Keep your ego under control.
What checks
And
the
keep
ego though, Sean? I'm wondering if it's the loss of it that checks it.
the loss is it for sure. For
Mm-hmm.
some, I think another thing is a lot of people fail in business and politics and so on because they don't know what the terms of victory are. What is your term of victory? So Odysseus's terms of victory were getting home safely with his people and his treasure.
Mm.
He lost sight of that when he wanted to mock his defeated enemy. He let his desire for fame, I want you to know who beat you. It's going to irk me to sleep at night knowing that you think somebody else did this to you, right? So that taking his eye off the ball, taking his eye away from his terms of victory and indulging his ego led to this catastrophe.
Mm.
So when you feel like you want to chest thump, so to speak, just ask yourself, does this help me in reaching my goal? Am I achieving my terms of victory by doing this, or am I putting it at risk? And often what you'll find is if you're talking about people being tired or they don't understand the tech or they need help, they're willing to let their ego take over. And by doing so, by not asking for help, but keeping your ego inflated, you
Mm-hmm.
are leading yourself directly into doom. That's what
Mm.
the ancient Greeks are telling us. And it hasn't changed.
That's so good. That's so good. I'm just looking at the people that I've worked with through the years. I've definitely worked with large egos and those that have, better raps over under it, over it rather. I'm just thinking about the correlation. As a general rule, self-made millionaires usually lose their wealth two times. Um,
Mm-hmm.
is it that they're getting smarter at acquiring it, or they're getting smarter at not, losing it or letting their ego
Mm-hmm.
get in the way? Um,
Mm-hmm.
I do think there's something to be said about either the loss that teaches us the lesson or witnessing the loss of someone else's. And I guess
Mm-hmm.
part of you sharing these stories is a borrow from history so you don't have to suffer the same consequences they did. Like, I'm going to
Yeah.
share
Oh, yeah, yeah,
this lesson so
exactly.
you can learn it from a wise man who already stumbled.
Yeah, yeah. Or just even take away the time element. Take away the time element. Instead of saying history or the ancients, just say somebody else screwed up, as you were saying, and I'm learning from that lesson. I'm not going to do that. It
Mm.
didn't work for him. And
Yeah.
I know person after person after person who they stumbled in the same way. So why should I think I'm different? Like fate works because we think it's not going to happen to us. But what
Mm-hmm.
history tells us is that it always happens to you. And it's when you least expect, like look at the Titanic sinking, right? Captain Smith, who was bringing the Titanic over, he was given the Titanic as a gift. It was a retirement gift because he was the most successful captain in the company.
Mm.
And when did he lose that ship? He lost that ship on a perfectly calm night with warnings in his pockets about the ice that lay ahead. There was nothing that was frightening about that night. Clear skies, flat seas. Uh, he had wireless communication. I mean, the latest modcom. And so he said, well, everything will be fine. And that's a kind of letting your ego get in the way, isn't it? Because you're
Mm.
saying, I've got a modern piece of tech. I've got all the mod cons on this piece of tech. It's a calm night. I don't really have to be vigilant, particularly, do I? Yep, that's when fate sticks his head up and says, hello, perfect lesson. And why ask yourself, this is a ship that failed 110 years ago. Why are we still talking about it? Why did Cameron invest all this money in making a film about that disaster? It's because that story speaks to us on a deep level, on an almost instinctual level. It's the perils of technological arrogance. It's the perils of not checking your ego and thinking every time you go to sea, every time, no matter what the conditions are, you are putting yourself at risk and your
Mm.
team at risk. So you must be on your toes always, right?
Mm.
That's the power of the story, right? So, and you lose sight of that because everything is fine. So, so really, business is a case of like set your goals, know what they are, know what your boundaries are, know when to ask for help, know what your terms of victory are.
Mm-hmm.
Don't be distracted by ego from your terms of victory.
Mm-hmm.
These are the things that keep coming up over and over again in
Mm-hmm.
history.
I love it. And I love this terms of victory, defining them and not letting ego getting in the way of that. And I think the Titanic is a totally relevant story. I remember when we spoke before, you told a story of a trench whistle, and I would love for you to share that. Gave a little insight as to who the pivoters, the listeners typically are. And I think that story is just really relevant to a lot of people listening right now.
Yeah. So this trench whistle, unfortunately, I don't have it on me, but it's a little brass thing. It looks like the Sherlock Holmes whistle. You've seen those sort of Victorian sort of circular things. They're about that big. And so a trench whistle was a badge of office. It was carried by British officers in the First World War, and they would blow it to signal that it was time to go over the top and make their attack. The thing is that British officers suffered a higher casualty rate than even their people did, and because they were leading from the front, right? So that's one way to look at the whistle. The other way to look at the whistle is to consider its origin. And its origin was, in fact, as a London police whistle, as a bobby whistle, and they were given out to police officers. They were very piercing, and you could hear it about a mile away. And the idea was that the police officer would find a crime in progress or find something, and he would blow it immediately to signal that he needed help, right? And then the other officers would come and converge on his location, right? Now you think about whether it's a fictional character like Sherlock Holmes or the actual London police in the Victorian age, these were, again, individualists, rugged people, competent people, people who could handle themselves in a fight, people who could solve crimes with the power of their brain. And the first thing they did was call for help. The first thing, blow the whistle, call for help, get everybody together, right? Not, I'm going to run and solve everything on my own, right? Because you might get away with that once, right? But ultimately, you know that that's not going to be a reliable officer, is it? Right? You don't want that guy on your team for very long, do you? So the ability to ask for help is a sign of competence in the London police force of the 1800s. And so I think that is a nice, handy reminder. You can hang it on the side of your computer. You know, it's like, don't be afraid to ask for help. That's what the whistle's for. You're carrying it around your neck. It's not buried in your pocket. It is around your neck where you can get to it easily. That's how important asking for help is, right? And again, these are not weaklings and wimps and losers, and you know, these are the forefront of crime fighters in a very violent city in a violent era.
Yeah.
So you can draw your conclusions.
And they use that. It's interesting. So in the work that I do with clients, I had a call just before this, and one of the phrases that I use a lot is this an opportunity to ask for help? Because we're so quick as business owners and leaders to jump in and like, all right, I'm going to problem solve this, which is good. There's definitely a bias towards action, which I love. But before we jump in and try to solve it ourselves, you know, pausing for a second and saying, is this an opportunity to ask for help? Is this an opportunity to ask for guidance or for expertise outside of me and my capabilities? And it's just a reminder for certain people that tend to, all right, well, I'm going to put my head down and my helmet on. I'm going to fix this myself.
Well, if we twist that a little bit, April, and say for some people it might resonate more if we change the pitch of it slightly and say, is this an opportunity to ask for help? Is good. But what about, is this an opportunity for me to reach my terms of victory faster by asking for help? In other words, the help is going to get me to my goal faster. The help is going to get me to my goal safer with less risk. So in other words, it's not just asking for help, which in the minds of some people could imply weakness, but it's asking for help as to take in mind the space shuttle program, right? Space shuttle couldn't get to orbit on its own. It needed 2 booster rockets, right? So it needed help. That's the whole point. Is that the clue is in the name. They're booster rockets. They help you up, right? It can't fly on its own, right? So the booster rockets were an opportunity to get the ship into orbit. Right. Yeah. And it couldn't get it. You could try, but it's not going to get you into orbit without, you know. So you see what I mean? Again, we're asking, you're making the point again and again and again that it's the help that gets you there. That's the people that it's you being smart enough to recognize that the shuttle's not going to fly into space on its own. It needs the 2 booster rockets to get there. And the commander who recognizes that is a commander you trust because he understands the limitations. Right? And part of good generalship, good leadership, being a good admiral is understanding the limitations of the system that you're working with. And you are part of the system that you're working with. You must understand your limitations. And that's what makes a professional, competent leader and business person.
Sean, before I have one final question I wanted to ask you, but before we get there, where is the best place? We're going to put it in the show notes as well. But where's the best place? I mean, these stories are so relevant and so good. And I'm sure you're sitting on top of a treasure chest of 100 more easily. Where's the best way for people to, how's the best way for people to connect with you?
They connect through the website, through the Fast Forward Talks, which is the company name, so to make it easy to remember. Just at the email, Sean at, connect with me on LinkedIn, all that stuff. I'm pretty happy to hear from everybody. So
Yeah.
As you can see, I like talking history, so you don't have to
Amazing.
just stop by for a history chat and
It's great.
share and learn from each other.
It's
And by the way,
it's amazing.
but in terms of like people finding stories themselves without me to help them, my advice for those people was just read the stories that you find interesting. It doesn't have to be Bronze Age Greek history, right?
Mm,
It could be Second World War if you're into that stuff. It could be Victorian age. It could be your own family history. Just, just your own, look back in your own past, take artifacts from your own life,
mhm.
as long as they're encapsulating or able to encapsulate the lessons that you've learned and the lessons that you need to keep, to remind yourself of when you go forward, it'll work.
I
Just
love
follow
this.
your own nose, follow your instincts, right? Just follow your story. Don't navigate in someone else's wake. Know how to navigate, but
Yeah.
not follow in someone else's wake. And you'll find the things you need to find that way. Just keep an open mind and look for connections.
I love the idea about connecting with the story, but also the visual anchor, whether it's a
Mm-hmm.
trench whistle, whether it's from family history, a photo, but something that's this visual anchor that brings you back to, we learn best as humans through story,
Mm-hmm.
something that connects us to the story again and again, and doesn't just become part of the background fabric of what we're doing, that we look at it and we go, oh, yep, I connect with that lesson. I remember what I was supposed to
Mm-hmm.
learn from that.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And it becomes a part of you because you're looking at it every day.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
what will happen is this is always a delightful moment when you look at an object for 6 months and then somebody asks you for help. And you suddenly yourself now find yourself using your own artifact to teach other people, to help other people. Now you're like, oh, geez, that really works. And it just keeps the energy going in the system because you learn it best when you teach others as well. So yeah, find
Yeah.
opportunities to teach others and
I
you'll
love that.
see what artifacts you need to add, what stories you should go off hunting for, whatever it is the case may be.
So
Yeah.
Sean, here's our last question. It's a big one. So if you could tell the world one thing, what would it be?
Mm-hmm. Well, apart from the usual philosophical stuff like, you know, you only have one life and all that sort of thing, I would say the single most important thing from history is the winners are the people who have set their terms of victory, have them clearly defined, and keep focused on that, right? And by terms of victory, I don't mean what your business success is. I mean understanding why you're in business in the first place, right? Is it to enjoy a nice life? Is it to provide for your family? What's the reason behind the business and the company? That's your ultimate term of victory. Keep that in mind and don't sacrifice that to achieve an intermediate step. That's what I would say.
That's brilliant. Love it.
So I hope that makes sense anyway.
I think it's good. I think everyone who's listening, including me, I've started that I'm going to go establish my terms of victory. I love even that language and just it's a great way to anchor you to that and to make sure that we're not on side quests. We're not getting distracted. We're not letting our ego get in the way.
Yeah.
And to our earlier point that we ask for help because it will get us to those terms even faster. It's a way to speed up our progress towards them. I love that concept.
Brilliant. Excellent. I'm glad it helped.
It is super, super relevant. Sean, thank you so much. I'm so glad that we
Pleasure.
got connected, and I'm so glad that you came and you're sharing the stories and also just your clear joy for history and bringing these stories forward for some of us like myself. Haven't heard these since I took Western traditions, so freshman in college. It's been a long time. And so bringing this stuff out, it's like, it is really relevant, and it kind of just piques your interest. And for those who are listening that, resonated with some of the stories, I think it's just such a good reminder, as we said at the beginning of this interview, which is sometimes the most important gift we can have in seeing our struggle or our situation clearly is knowing that it's actually not unique, that it's as old as time, and there's other
We've
people
been here
that have
before.
navigated. Yeah, we've been here before, and people have navigated successfully before. There's peace and comfort in that.
Exactly right. Exactly. And opportunity, and the opportunity to enjoy what you're doing. Remember, you have to, part of your terms of victory should be enjoying the process. If it's a miserable journey, okay, think twice.
Yeah.
So all of that stuff comes together, right? Yeah.
Thank you, Sean. This was amazing.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Yep. Pleasure. Cheers, everybody.
Bye-bye. I hope you got some amazing information from our interview today, and I've set up the next video for you. So I'll see you over there at the next video.